The room smells of coffee, warm, clean. After weeks in the Brecon Beacons sleeping rough in January cold, the kind of cold that gets into the joints and stays there, that makes the fingers clumsy and the mind slow, that warmth alone might be enough to undo you. It hits the moment the door opens, not aggressive warmth, not the blast of a radiator pushed to its limit, but the ambient warmth of a building that has always been heated, that has never not been comfortable, that belongs to a world where warmth is taken for granted rather than earned hour by hour with a bergen on your back. You sit down. The chair is upholstered. That registers too. A woman appears and sets things down in front of you. A cup, still steaming, and a plate of biscuits. She is friendly, not in the forced way of someone performing a role, but in the way of a person who works here and has no particular reason to be unfriendly. She means you no harm, or so every instinct in your exhausted body is now insisting, loudly, at the same moment that the warmth of the room is telling the same thing to your skin. You have been cold and hungry and alone for weeks. The cup is right there. The biscuit is right there. Across the table sit men who look like solicitors, professional, calm. The kind of men you would see in any high street office, in any town in Britain, doing the ordinary legal business of ordinary lives. They have paperwork with your name on it. Real paperwork. Not training documents, not forms in a folder. The documents for the house you are in the middle of buying or selling, whatever your actual life looks like beyond the selection course, the life you put on hold when this started. Your real life. The one that still exists, apparently, because someone has been through it carefully enough to find this. They go through the details with you, politely, thoroughly, as though this is simply a matter that needs tidying up, an administrative inconvenience that can be resolved quickly so everyone can get on with their day. They slide the document across the table and ask you to sign. Some men do, not many. One or two across an intake, but some. And when they do, they are done. Their course ends not with a final hard march, not with a physical collapse, not with some dramatic moment of visible failure on a mountainside. It ends at a table, with a cup of coffee in front of them and a pen in their hand and the ink barely dry. This is a part of 22 SAS selection that almost nobody talks about. Not the fan dance. Not the long drag, not the weeks of solo navigation through the Brecon Beacons that account for 9 out of every 10 failures before the course even reaches this point. The part that goes unmentioned is the one that comes after all of that, when a candidate is at his most exhausted, his most relieved, his most certain that the worst is behind him. When his body has stopped bracing for the next blow and started, for the first time in weeks, to open itself back up to the world. That is when the SAS hands him coffee and calls it a test. This account of that test rests on one man's testimony, Krishna Thapa, a former Royal Gurkha Rifles soldier who passed 22 SAS selection in 2003. Served as Company Sergeant Major of the regiment's Mountain Troop and retired in 2022 after nearly 2 decades of frontline service in Bosnia, Kosovo, Iraq and Afghanistan. What he describes isn't presented here as officially documented SAS procedure. The Ministry of Defence has never published the specifics of its resistance to interrogation training. What Thapa describes is his own course, his own experience, his own account of what happened and what it meant. The ministry says nothing about it. Other veterans who have spoken about the R2I phase, the 36-hour resistance to interrogation element that forms the final gate of selection, corroborate the architecture without giving the same specific setting. The hotel framing is Thapa's alone. That is why his account matters and why the uncertainty flag stays in place. He is the only available guide to this particular room. He is, it turns out, an unusually reliable guide. He was born in the Himalayan highlands of Nepal, beneath the Annapurna Massif, the 8,091-metre peak that kills a higher proportion of those who attempt it than Everest does. His tribe, according to one account, dedicates its eldest son to the worship of nature before he is born. At 3 or 4 years old, the prayers begin. At 19, he joined the Royal Gurkha Rifles. He does not describe the Gurkhas as a brand or a mythology. He describes it as a fact of where he came from, one strand in a cultural continuity that runs through his family across generations. The Gurkha recruitment process he cleared before he ever reached SAS selection filters approximately 20,000 to 30,000 applicants across Nepal, through 3 sequential phases, down to roughly 180 places per year. The British Army's own documentation for the regiment calls it one of the most rigorous military selection processes in the world. Thapar passed that. Then, after approximately 5 years of service in the regiment, his British commander called him into his office. "My British commander called me into his office," Thapar told the FFI Practitioner podcast in July 2024, and said, "We're going to send the Gurkhas for trial to see how we do on the SAS." Of course, everyone had heard of the Special Forces and who they are, but I never realised I could be selected to join from the Gurkhas. He didn't volunteer. His regiment sent him, and he went. That distinction matters to him. When the podcast interviewer asks whether he was the first Gurkha in the SAS, his answer is careful. "I was one of the first. There were few other Gurkhas from other regiments. We call our regiment Royal Gurkha Rifles. I was one of the first. 2 of us were the first to pass from the RGRs." He knows the difference between what he can claim and what he can't. He holds the line on the exact fact rather than accepting a larger version of it that would sound more impressive. That precision is its own form of authority. It tells you something about how he gives testimony. The SAS selection pass rate across all available published accounts sits at under 10%. 2 sequential elite filters in series, the Gurkha recruitment process and SAS selection, produce a combined probability so small that no documentary about elite military service has the mathematics to make it sound normal. Thapar cleared them both, then spent nearly 2 decades leading men in a regiment that operates in every environment war produces. In 2017, while still a serving warrant officer, he summited Everest, the first serving British warrant officer to do so across multiple biographical sources. In 2018, K2's speaker biographies list 9 world-first mountaineering records. He has led expeditions including amputees, blind climbers, Parkinson's patients, veterans with PTSD. He describes all of this with the same register. "I was very fortunate to lead the whole expedition," he said of the K2 ascent. Fortunate. That is the word he reaches for. The evidence of his career suggests a somewhat different explanation, but he doesn't say that. He says fortunate, and he means it. And that restraint is exactly why his account of what happened in the hotel room should be taken seriously when he says some men fail there who wouldn't have failed anywhere on the mountain. To understand what that room does to a man, you have to understand what the man has already been through before he walks into it. Not as spectacle, as mechanism. Because the physical phase of selection isn't the main event. It's the delivery system that makes the main event possible. SAS selection runs twice a year, in summer and winter. Candidates are based at Sennybridge Camp in the Brecon Beacons, South Wales, a place that in British January offers sustained cold, frequent rain, and hills that seem designed specifically to punish anyone moving across them with weight. The first phase, called the Hills phase or aptitude phase, lasts approximately 4 weeks. Every day, candidates strap on a bergen and a rifle and navigate between checkpoints alone. No trails, no guidance. A compass and a hand-drawn sketch map. That is the complete toolkit. The directing staff at each checkpoint neither encourage nor criticize. They check you in and check you out. That is all. Former SAS Sergeant Major Billy Billingham has described the experience as being on your own and left to your own devices. In a British Army career before this point, there was always someone giving instructions, an instructor setting the pace, a section commander leading from the front, a structure that absorbed the smaller decisions and left you free to focus on the task. In the Hills phase, that structure vanishes entirely. For men who have spent years inside an institution that tells them what to do next, being alone with every decision, which route, which pace, which checkpoint order, is itself a category of stress that the physical weight only amplifies. Men's Health UK has quoted Elite UK Force's description of this directly. No encouragement or criticism is provided by the supervising staff at the checkpoints. This can be a marked contrast from the selectees' experience in their parent units. They would be used to their instructors shouting constant instructions at them, along with encouragement and abuse. The demands of life in a Special Forces unit require each member to be self-motivated. That is the official adjacent framing of what is, at its core, a loneliness test. Can you operate when no one is watching, when no one is pushing, when the only accountability is the checkpoint time you either make or miss? The fan dance marks the end of the first week. 24 kilometres over Penny Fan at 886 metres, the highest point in the Brecon Beacons, within 4 hours and 10 minutes. In August 2013, 3 Army reservists died attempting a charity version of the same route in 30-degree heat, carrying packs weighing at least 27 kilograms each. They collapsed at the finish line. In January, the danger runs in the other direction. Hypothermia, exposure, the wind that comes off the ridge and removes heat faster than the body can generate it. The long drag is the Hills phase's final act. 64 kilometres across the same terrain, carrying a 25-kilogram bergen, not including food, water or rifle. Navigating checkpoint to checkpoint without using paths or trails, in under 20 hours. Across test week, the load increases by 5 pounds per day, starting at 35 pounds, reaching 55 pounds on the 5th day, across distances that aggregate to roughly 6 marathons of mountain terrain. The survivors are the approximately 10% who make it to continuation training. And nobody tells them. At the finish line of the long drag, no directing staff member steps forward to announce who has passed and who has failed. Candidates hand in their kit. They wait. The ambiguity is part of the design. It mirrors the informational conditions of actual operations, where clarity about one's status is a luxury that may not be available. After weeks of supreme physical output, with no feedback, no encouragement, no criticism, candidates must sit in the uncertainty of not knowing whether everything they just endured was enough. What that uncertainty does to a body that has been running on adrenaline and cortisol and willpower for 4 weeks is specific. The tension that has been holding the system together, the operational vigilance, the constant low-level alertness that selection requires, begins to release. Slowly, incrementally, because there is no immediate threat and no immediate demand. The body starts its recovery. And in that recovery, in that letting go, the candidate becomes something he hasn't been since he arrived at Sennybridge. Vulnerable. Not weak, not broken, but open. In the way that exhausted systems open when the crisis passes. Men who clear the hills phase move through continuation training, advanced weapons handling, demolitions, close quarters combat, parachute skills. And then to jungle phase in Brunei or Belize, where four-man patrols operate behind notional enemy lines for weeks using live ammunition in conditions candidates describe as relentlessly humid, biologically hostile and physically exhausting, in a completely different register from the cold of Wales. Cuts in the jungle infect. Navigation in triple canopy forest with no horizon and no landmarks is a different skill from Brecon Beacons navigation with a compass. Candidates reportedly lose up to 6 kilograms of body weight in this phase. What they gain is the habit of sustained operational discipline in an environment that never stops being uncomfortable. After jungle phase, escape and evasion, then resistance to interrogation. The R2I phase lasts approximately 36 hours. Candidates wearing World War II clothing, heavy vintage jackets, unlaced boots, are released into the countryside. The Special Forces support group hunts them using dogs, helicopters and ground patrols. Whether a candidate is caught before the designed end of the exercise or not, everyone eventually faces tactical questioning. The documented conditions span multiple former operator accounts. Stress positions against a wall, continuous white noise, sleep deprivation, cold, hunger. The permitted answers to any question are 4. Name, rank, serial number, date of birth. Any information beyond those 4, any deviation from the standard refusal phrase, fails the course. That is the publicly documented structure. The E&E deception phase, with its specific props and specific mechanism, lives in a narrower category of testimony. One man's account of his own course, corroborated at the architectural level by other veterans, but not in the specific setting he describes. The setting Thapar describes isn't a bare room and a hard chair. He has compared it to a 5-star hotel. Warmth, an atmosphere more like a cafe or a lobby than a military facility. What appears to be a swimming pool visible from somewhere nearby. Biscuits on the table, coffee brought by a woman who is friendly and apparently genuine. Across the table, people presenting themselves as solicitors or, at minimum, as professionals with the credentials and manner of solicitors. They have documents connected to the candidate's real life. A house purchase, a property sale. Whatever actual transaction is ongoing in the personal life that exists beyond the wire, the life that didn't stop while selection started, the one that still has a solicitor and paperwork and decisions that need making. They know the details. They go through the file carefully, helpfully, as anyone would in the course of a legitimate professional meeting. Then they ask you to sign. The instruction given before this phase is, according to Thapar's account, unambiguous. As long as you aren't signing any documents or altering any information, you will be fine. That is the rule. One rule stated clearly. Everything that follows is designed to make that rule feel unnecessary to hold. Whether the solicitors are genuine legal professionals brought in for the exercise or highly convincing role players, Thapar's wording genuinely leaves open. He describes them as genuine solicitors or genuine people. Whether the documents are literally the candidate's own personal papers or a meticulously constructed training file built around his real circumstances is similarly unresolved in the account. He says, "your paperwork," and the ambiguity in that phrase is honest. The functional effect either way is identical. The scenario must feel completely real, because only a scenario that feels real produces the genuine stress response the selectors are looking for. If you can tell it's a test, it fails to test the thing they need tested. A single signature, that is the mechanism Thapar describes, not a sustained interrogation, not a long conversation, not hours of psychological pressure building toward a breaking point. Just the pen touching paper, once, in a room where the temperature is comfortable, where the biscuit is right there, where the woman was friendly and the man across the table had a perfectly reasonable explanation for why this particular administrative matter needed attending to now. Some men sign. The comfort as failure mechanism does not rest on Thapar's account alone. Dean Stott, a former UK Special Forces veteran, has described candidates being removed from selection for accepting comfort during the evasion phase. The specific example he gives is a candidate found in a farmer's house, sitting at a table with a full cooked breakfast in front of him. He is finished. Not because the hunter force caught him in the field, but because the warmth of a kitchen and the hospitality of a civilian was enough. Phil Campion, who served in 22 SAS, describes a different version of the paperwork mechanism. Candidates are told they need to enter a building to sign some administrative forms in order to continue the course. The candidates who go in don't come back out on the same terms. What they discover on entering is that the paperwork isn't the final step before continuation. It's the threshold into formal captivity. Chris Ryan, a former 22 SAS soldier, has described what he calls Mr. Friendly in the interrogation context. A clean-cut, apparently sympathetic figure who offers something comfortable, chocolate, a cup of tea, and then asks the candidate to sign a document or provide information. The warmth isn't incidental. It's the instrument. None of these independent accounts describe the specific hotel setting Thapar gives. Ryan describes interrogation rooms. Campion describes an ordinary building entered under false pretenses. Stott describes field conditions. The five-star hotel framing, the swimming pool, the cafe atmosphere, the biscuits, is unique to Thapar's testimony and must be treated as such. What all of them corroborate is the underlying mechanism. Comfort presented to an exhausted candidate, a document requiring a signature, and compliance understood as failure. The question is why this works on men who just survived 4 weeks in the Brecon Beacons in January, jungle training in Brunei, and the systematic physical and psychological assault of the R2I's opening hours. The answer isn't that they are weak. It's more specific than that, and more uncomfortable. Pain is easy to resist relative to warmth, and the reason is structurally precise. Under coercion, the adversarial relationship is clear. The person causing harm is against you, and that clarity gives resistance something solid to brace against. You know what you are defending against. You know who is on which side of the exchange. The internal architecture of resistance, which depends on a clear adversarial frame to function, has a wall to push off. Soldiers trained to resist interrogation understand hostile pressure as hostile. They have a category for it, and the category activates the correct responses. Warmth removes that frame entirely. The person across the table is kind. The room is comfortable. Every social cue the nervous system has been calibrated across thousands of years of human evolution to read as safety is pointing in one direction. A friendly woman who brings coffee isn't, in the deep grammar of social recognition, an enemy. The cognitive category that would organize the correct response, sustained vigilance, refusal, non-compliance, does not activate because nothing has triggered it. The body isn't fighting. The body is relaxing, gratefully, into what it has been longing for since the first night in the Brecon Beacons. Research across the interrogation literature shows that disclosure is significantly more likely when a rapport-building approach is used early in the exchange. Confessions, genuine ones, not coerced fabrications, are more likely when interrogators maintain a neutral and respectful stance. Comfortable physical settings specifically increase disclosure rates. These findings run directly counter to the cultural assumption that coercion is the effective tool. The Intelligence Science Board's 2006 report, Educing Information, Interrogation, Science and Art, published by the National Defense Intelligence College Press, reached a central finding that has held across subsequent research. Coercive interrogation hasn't been scientifically established as an effective means of obtaining reliable intelligence. What works consistently across the literature is rapport, the perceived sense that the person across the table isn't hostile. The cognitive ambiguity of an interaction that does not clearly register as adversarial. The report's historical analysis notes that communist interrogation techniques designed to break POW resistance during the Korean War worked not through pain alone, but through alternating punishments and rewards, the oscillation between hardship and apparent relief. The alternation isn't arbitrary, it's the mechanism. Suffering followed by warmth does not simply weaken the body. It teaches the body to associate warmth with safety. Then, at the precise moment when the body is most convinced it has reached safety, the actual test begins. Robert Cialdini's reciprocity principle, documented across decades of social psychology research, names part of the mechanism at the social level. When someone does something for you, brings warmth, brings food, offers apparent care after prolonged deprivation, the social obligation to give something back activates automatically. Not as a conscious decision, but as a wired response, below the level of deliberate reasoning. The body begins to open. Vigilance drops. The warmth in the room starts to feel like evidence of goodwill, because warmth has almost always meant goodwill. Applied research in hospitality settings has shown that giving diners a small, unexpected, personalized gift with the bill significantly increases tips. The reciprocity trigger requires almost nothing to activate and requires no prior relationship. A cup of coffee and a biscuit and a friendly woman after 4 weeks of cold and loneliness and hunger isn't almost nothing. The hills phase does not just make the warm room feel good. It manufactures the precise physiological state that makes the warm room lethal. It teaches the candidate's body that warmth means the worst is over, that relief is safety, that if you have survived what you just survived and someone is being kind to you, you have made it through. The room doesn't break the candidate breaks himself, because every lesson the past 4 weeks taught him, that suffering is the test, that if you can endure pain, you can endure anything, that the mountain is the enemy, is exactly wrong about what comes next. Thapa understood this. He said so not through theorizing, but through 2 decades of service in a regiment that deploys into environments where manufactured comfort is a genuine operational instrument. He describes the comfort phase as the one that broke people. Not the fan dance, not the long drag, not the jungle. The room, with the coffee and the biscuits and the solicitors with your paperwork. That framing comes from someone who summited Everest and K2, who led a 14-man team on the latter at altitude, in conditions he has described as a moment when everything, body, mind, effort, was giving out simultaneously. He didn't say K2 was harder than the selection comfort phase. He said the comfort phase was where people failed who wouldn't have failed anywhere on the mountain. That is a different kind of statement. His character in the available interview record is consistent across platforms. The FFI Practitioner podcast, the Zero Limits podcast, the Lad Bible Minutes With interview, the Mulligan Brothers interview. Every format produces the same register: precise, grounded, quiet. He credits circumstance where others would credit themselves. He mentions his commander's decision, the regiment's trial, the opportunity, he says, he never anticipated. He says, very fortunate, to describe leading a Guinness World Record expedition. He corrects the inflated version of his own biography. First Gurkha becomes one of the first two from the RGRs, without being asked to. There is a moment in his accounts where the human warmth in his own story surfaces. He has described his first encounter with British Army food, the baked beans, the sausage, the institutional meals that British soldiers consume without ceremony in any barracks across the country. His reaction was apparently one of genuine puzzlement at how anyone ate this willingly every single day. And then, at some point in his service, it became the thing he couldn't live without. That is how acculturation works, quietly and without announcement, until the thing that once seemed alien becomes the thing that feels like home. He tells it without sentiment, as a small, true thing. It's the kind of detail that a man who was constructing a heroic narrative wouldn't include. The unit the badge belongs to has operated in the North African desert, in the jungles of Borneo and Oman, in the mountains of Afghanistan, in urban hostage rescue scenarios across multiple decades, in maritime operations, in airborne insertions. Desert, jungle, mountain, maritime, airborne, sometimes in combination within a single operational period. The mountain troop exists because mountain warfare is a distinct operational domain, with its own requirements around navigation, survival, technical ascent, and the logistics of operating at altitude with small teams and no infrastructure. Thapar led that troop. He knows what it requires. What 22 SAS confronts in the field is, in important structural respects, similar to what the hotel room replicates during selection. A managed environment, a controlled, apparent threat level, a situation in which what feels safe may not be safe, and in which a single act of compliance at the wrong moment can compromise an operation, expose other people, or cost lives beyond your own. A soldier who breaks under manufactured warmth in a selection facility would break under it in the field, when an apparent ally offers hospitality, when a local contact provides food and shelter, when the apparent normality of a civilian setting works to lower the guard that must stay up. The filter in the warm room isn't theoretical. It maps directly onto the operational environments where the regiment works. Former operators have described selection's psychological resistance testing as preparation for exactly those scenarios, the real-world conditions where the threat arrives in the form of apparent comfort rather than apparent danger, where an offer of kindness is the instrument of exploitation, where compliance, masquerading as ordinary social grace, can be the mechanism by which operations unravel. And so it comes back to the room, the warm room, the table, the cup, the pen. Phil Campion has noted that candidates who entered the building to sign the administrative paperwork didn't come back on the same terms. That is the unspectacular mechanics of it. No dramatic confrontation, no public collapse, no moment visible to other candidates. Just the pen touching paper, a quiet note made somewhere by someone watching from an adjacent space. And then the ordinary bureaucratic process of a man being returned to his unit. The mountains had required weeks of visible public attrition. The directing staff watching at every checkpoint, other candidates present and struggling alongside each other. The hotel required nothing visible at all, just the ink on the page. The Australian SAS, in their documented resistance to interrogation training, tells candidates explicitly before the exercise begins, never sign anything. The stated operational reason is practical. A signature reproduced on a fabricated confession or propaganda document is a weapon that can be used against you, against the people you serve with, against the mission. In the selection context Thapar describes, the signature isn't the danger in that operational sense. The signature is the evidence. It proves something about the man who made it, that after weeks of being taught by his own body to endure cold and pain and isolation and the absence of guidance, he couldn't maintain a single clear rule when the temperature in the room went up and someone with a warm manner and a reasonable-sounding request put a pen within reach. The man who signed isn't a failure by most available measures. He got further into this selection than 9 out of every 10 men who started it. He marched across 64 kilometres of Welsh mountain terrain, alone, in the dark, in January, with 25 kilograms on his back and a rifle in his hands. He survived jungle phase. He operated behind notional enemy lines for weeks. He stood in stress positions in a cold room with white noise blasted at him and gave only his name, rank, serial number and date of birth. By almost any conventional military measure of toughness, he was exceptional. He just couldn't sit in a warm room with a cup of coffee and say no to a polite man with legitimate-looking paperwork. Couldn't hold one rule when every instinct shaped by the previous weeks was insisting it was no longer necessary to hold it. Couldn't feel warmth and still see threat. That gap between surviving pain and surviving comfort is exactly the gap the SAS needs to know about before it trusts a man into the environments where that gap will be tested for real. The mountains only prove a man can suffer. The sofa proves whether he can be trusted. And that is why the SAS hands you coffee before they hand you the badge, and why the man who signed never understood that the biscuit was the test, not the mountain. The mountain was just the setup. If you want more stories like this, subscribe.